So the scripture passage today is rather short, so if you will join with me, maybe it'll sink on a deeper level, Dale. Let's say this one together. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. So, character building. Not a topic that you hear very often. I have a friend that's from South Africa, lives here in the Valley, and he has a very different life story than most Americans. Where he's from, there's still a tradition, and it's still part of people's esteem, is to build character. So he told me this story that as a young man, he volunteered for Suicide Hotline. And I said, why did you do that? I was expecting to hear, well, I had someone in my life that committed suicide, or perhaps I was going to hear, well, I've been through things like that. His reason was, it wasn't because of anything in his life. His reason was, well, I wanted to build my character. I wanted to build my character, so he put himself in a situation in order to build his character. How often do we hear stories like that? Well, I volunteered in order to build my character. I joined this organization in order to build my character. But yet, we join fitness to build our bodies. We go to college to build our minds. We go to therapists to improve our emotions. But where can we build our character? And do we put ourselves in situations in order to build our character? I believe that there's two types of resumes in life. There's the kind of resume that you've, 2 pages, front and back, that you can submit for a job, and it lists all your technical skills. But there is another kind of resume. There's the resume that you don't really write, but your loved ones write for you at the end of your life. And that one is listed full of things that are not the same as a job resume. In a eulogy, it's full of, they were so loving, they were so kind. All the kinds of character, whether intentionally built or not, a person had in their life. So I want to ask you, have you ever thought about working on that resume, your eulogy resume, throughout your life, and not let it be just accidental that you develop certain characteristics? It is my goal for this church to be a place that we can examine character, make character, different types of character, accessible, take them apart, and learn how to build them for ourselves. Now, this whole year, we've talked about different values. These are all character-building values. We've talked so far about kindness, forgiveness, grace, hope, and this month we will talk about humility. None of these characters are personality traits. They're not more accessible to some people than others. They're things that certain people have chosen to work on in their life. And you can choose to do the same. You can choose to have more character than you presently have. What would it look like if you worked your whole life on your eulogy resume rather than your job resume? So let's start with humility. Let's start with a definition. I will just tell you up front. This has been a really hard one, and I feel like I say that every first Sunday when I wrestle with these values. But this one is tricky because it can go either way. It can either be a positive thing or it can also be a negative thing. So we're going to look at both of those some today and throughout this whole month. Sometime, let's go back to just one more. Just this passage. Let's save it there for a minute. So sometimes humility can look, when I was looking it up, it was often defined in the negative. You know, a word is difficult to define when they only give you the negative, right? Like this: humble, not arrogant, not prideful, not boastful. Okay, so that's what it's not, but what is it? And none of those words are very attractive, right? There's nothing sexy about any of these words that are associated with humble, modest, polite, respectful, patient, unpretentious. Those are not really the most get up and go kind of words, are they? And what's interesting is that it's one of those words that you can also more clearly get to the meaning of when you know the negatives of it. Humility has this dark side. It's often defined in more passive, apprehensive, content, fearful, hesitant, ordinary, quiet, self-conscious, meek, simple, submissive, soft-spoken, timid, and unambiguous. I mean, there's just so many difficult sides to the word humility. But we're going to work from this definition. Okay, now you can go forward. We're going to work from this definition today. Humility is intelligent self-respect that keeps us from thinking too much or too little of ourselves. It reminds us how far we have come, while at the same time helps us see how far short we are of what we can be. Okay, in fact, let's read this one together. Humility is intelligent self-respect that keeps us from thinking too much or too little of ourselves. It reminds us how far we have come, while at the same time helps us see how far short we are of what we can be. I hope you hear in that a sense of balance, right? Balance. We'll get to that some more. Another difficulty with humble is that it's associated with kind of a lowness, brought low. Anyone here ever had to eat humble pie? Anybody ever had to eat some humble pie anywhere? Perhaps you had to eat some crow. Maybe you ate some crow. Yeah, see, another problem with the word humility. So a funny story about humble pie is that one time John and I we were living in Cedar Bluff, and we rode over to Rome, Georgia, which is about an hour away. It's the closest hospital to where we lived, and he had a church member that was in the hospital. So I went in with him, and it was P.K. McWhorter. He just lived right down the street from us there in Cedar Bluff. Delightful man. We knew him. We saw him probably every day. We lived in Cedar Bluff. Well, he was in the hospital with a heart problem, and so I went in with John to visit him, even though he wasn't my church member. I was serving in another church. But I knew PK, and so John is there with him, and PK is telling John, well, they did this thing on my chest. I can't remember what it's called, but it lets you see inside to look a little closer. And John, bless his heart, with all confidence. And we're told in seminary, do not talk medical language. You're not taught medical language. You might be at somebody's bedside a lot, but you are not a doctor. So John treaded out on that thin ice. And because PK didn't know what it was, John stepped in and said, "Oh, I know what that is. I know what they did to you. They did a mammogram." They did a mammogram on you. And he said it with such confidence. I mean, he was so confident that that was the right thing. And I was in the room, and because he said it with such confidence, I thought he was right too. And PK, bless his heart, laying there going, well, you might be right about that. Well, maybe it was a mammogram. Maybe it was a mammogram. And so on the way home, there's a long drive back. On the way home, John goes, wait a minute. What did I tell PK McWhorter? I told him he had a mammogram. It like struck him. No, he meant to say ultrasound, of course. And so it wasn't until much later that John realized that he needed to eat some humble pie. It's not always, anyway. It's funny. We've all had moments like that. And you just feel a little embarrassed by them. The great thing about humility is it is not a personality trait. It is not a personality trait. It is accessible. It can be for anyone and everyone. And the beautiful thing is, it's the dish that's easier to eat if you dish it yourself than if it's forced on you. It's easier to eat if you serve it yourself and eat it yourself than if you're forced to do it. So there is a sweet spot that is humility. There's extremes one way and extreme the other way, and then there's this sweet spot that is humility. So I'm gonna take this with me because I'll forget what it is. Like the low side is when it's too low. When humility is seen too low, it's like ego empty. When you have absolutely no ego, no self-esteem, a lack of confidence. Now that's not humility at all. That's just downright embarrassing. When someone is that low, that's not humility. That's not what we're talking about at all. And way up here, way up high, it's when someone is egotistical, overconfident, and arrogant, right? That's not good at all either. You feel the yuckiness of that as well. But somewhere in the middle of that low and that too high is humility. And there's a balance between it. Overconfident, not confident enough. There's a nice balance. And the further that you go in one extreme or the other, the harder it is to get back to the middle, to get back to the balance. If you're really egotistical, humility feels like absolute depravity. And when you're so low, even humility feels like, oh, that's just too much about myself. So humility is right in the middle of these very, very extremes. The beautiful thing about humility, because it's in that balance, is it is intelligent. It is about self-respect. It's about genuineness. And yes, it is about confidence. Not overconfidence, but downright honest confidence. So how do you have humility? Over the course of this month, I'm going to give you some really important tools to how to have and train yourself for this character trait. Here's one. And you can see how it's a balance. I am brilliant, and I am not. It's a balance. The beautiful thing about that statement is I believe that it is true to who we are as children of God. We are created in the image of God. That God loves us can be known by every cell of our body. Every action of our day can be an action from that truth that God loves us. Now, that does not inflate us so much that it then puts us up on a pedestal, that we are better than others. For if I am a child of God, and I truly believe it, then I also believe that each and every one of you and each and every one on the world is also a child of God. There's that balance. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who I took a class from, I've shared this story before, he said that if we really believed that we were children of God, all of us were children of God, that when we met another person, we would bow before them. Children of God, loved by God, each and every one of us. I am, and so are you. I am brilliant, and so are you. This I am brilliant and I am not comes from this book. If you ever want to, this is a great book, Egonomics. I am brilliant and am not. The not part is to show that we're human. You know, I may be a child of God, but we live in a broken world. We live in a broken world. Now, what does this look like for our church? I don't know about y'all, but I feel like since January, this church has just taken a turn in a beautiful direction. We're deeper, we are more diverse than we have ever been. I feel that our voice in the community is more clearly progressive, that we have so much more to be proud of. This week, we fed 140 people a meal. We have so much to be proud of. Regularly, I tell people that I meet in my life that are not connected to the church, I get to say we are a diverse church, racially, sexually oriented, diverse, age-wise. Each one of those descriptions is something I'm incredibly proud of. And I've never had a church that's been any one of those things. And right now in our culture, where churches are on the decline, it is a brilliant and beautiful thing for us to be able to say that. And we should be proud of that. And I'm also proud of our flag that we put out on the street. I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud of my bishops of the United Methodist Church this week made a statement requesting that we stay in the parish summit. I am so proud to be a Methodist right now. We have a bold and beautiful, necessary statement to say to the world. We have a bold and beautiful statement to say to Medford, Oregon. I am so proud of who we are. And yet I know that we're not all we can be. I know that people walk in regularly, and this is not what they want. This is not where they want to be. We cannot be everything to everyone. That's okay. But it does show our shortcomings, right? I'm proud of us, but we're not everything. We're not everything. there's not a week goes by that after I preach, I go home and I think, okay, I must have made some mistakes. I wonder what they were. And then that worm goes through my head, and I redo my whole sermon trying to look for that little mistake. It's normal. It's normal. I'm proud to be your pastor, but I know I am not perfect. I'm proud of this church, but I know it's not perfect. I know it's not all it can be for Medford because it's such an important time right now. So this definition, humility is intelligent self-respect. We should be proud of ourselves. That keeps us from thinking too much or too little of ourselves. It's that balance. It helps us, it reminds us how far we have come, while at the same time helps us see how far short we are of what we can be. I have such hopes and dreams for our church. I'm just so proud of where we are, and I just see where we can be and what a difference we can make in people's lives. Now, I've told you before that my biggest passion as a pastor is to connect to people that have been hurt by the church. Because the church does make mistakes. Worldwide, it does make mistakes. I experienced it in my own life and my own background. And the beautiful thing is, healing can more easily come through the church than outside of the church. When people experience difficult and negative experiences in the church, they need to find a church to bring healing for their pain and difficulty. So that's where my own personal passion is. What that means is that I'm constantly aware of our shortcomings. So I lay that before you, that even though I'm proud of us, I am ever aware of our potential missteps. So I ask for us to seriously consider religious humility. What that means is that we don't have all the answers, and it's totally okay if someone else goes to another church. It's totally okay if people come here today and do not believe all that we believe. Maybe the first line of a prayer that says, "Gracious God," maybe that's where they trip over. I don't even know if I believe in God. I'm okay with that. I'm glad that you're here. That is religious humility. When we say, there's room here for you not to believe everything. It also says that God is so big that God can show God's self in other religious traditions. That is religious humility, to believe that we don't have all the answers. If we keep saying that we're the only way, this will not be a way for people in the world. Because I know that when people walk out of this place because we're too hardline, they can find God in the world. They can find God in the world every single moment of the day. We don't have a market on access to God. Religious humility is a necessity for us. It's a necessity for us. So, here's a quote from Carl Sagan, which I feel like is appropriate for this week, and I think is consistent with religious humility. Who is more humble? The scientist who looks at the universe with an open mind and accepts whatever the universe has to teach us, or someone who says something in this book must be considered the literal truth, and never mind the fallibility of all the human beings involved. We don't have all the answers. But yet we're humble to our task. I think we're doing good work. And I ask you this month to consider doing great effort to add humility to your life. Why? Why would I ask you to do that? Because I want you to have a resume that you are proud of when it's really not about you anymore. To have a resume that you are proud of. Next week, we will touch on humility, a different definition that says true humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. That's next week.